Welcome in, everybody. Let's dive right into it. Alright, so most, if not all, shows, science fiction or not, they have a lot of qualities in their characters or hierarchies or societies that are in the shows that we as the audience can relate to, right? It's got something there that can be a pull, right? An anchor for us to kind of subconsciously put ourselves into their situations, right? Into their shoes. So it can be a more compelling show or movie, right? I mean, we've even come so far as to make things like robots and zombies, vampires, werewolves. We've got all the most horrific monsters in literature. And we make them more human by making them into hybrids or giving them more relatable human characteristics, making them the good guys, right? Or at least the underdogs, you know? I think a pretty good example of this, progression-wise, is, say, the Underworld movies, right? You had the first movie that was just Underworld, right? Kate Beckinsale. And you had the vampires and the lichens, the werewolves. Neither side was good. Both sides were bad. Both were a blight on their human cities that they lived in. But you go down the filmography and then you get to, I can't remember if it was Underworld Evolutions or whatever, but it was that one movie where we got the backstory of one of the important werewolf characters, and it's in like the medieval times or whatever. And the werewolves turn out to be like scrappy underdogs, no pun intended, right? And there's like this mysterious love interest, and the two are gonna have a baby, and she's a vampire, he's a werewolf, and her dad kills her. Spoilers, because she would be an abomination. And yeah, we made them a ton more human. You could have just made both sides of this conflict human, and it'd be the same story playing out, right? You got a faction of slaves and a faction of noblemen, and a faction of like soldiers and nobility that are oppressing the slaves. Yeah, it's just, medieval times, but with werewolves and vampires, right? And then we get Twilight, like in the middle of all that. So yeah, we've made the horrific creatures of the night far more relatable. But why haven't we bent the tilt the other direction? And I don't mean making the monsters absolutely, bad guys or irredeemable villains. I mean, we have that already. I mean, why haven't we made the stories about things that we can't relate to? Right? We can understand and even relate to the monsters and the villains, even when they're irredeemable and they're absolute menaces. Because, hey, who isn't at some point in their life, right? Everybody's got something. Everybody's got some kind of backstory. Unless you're some kind of Mormon or something. Come on. So, what I'm talking about are things that the audience absolutely cannot connect to whatsoever. Say if we had a show or a movie about a society of cannibals, you might have a very small population, I hope, that could connect to the story about a society of cannibals. But I don't think anyone, like in the layman populace, the general public, is going to relate whatsoever to a town full of Hannibal Lecters. You know what I mean? So, yeah, like, just pack your city full of insane psycho killers whose reasons are not ones that anyone can understand. And there's a really small spectrum here. Like, I think the other end is obviously the eldritch beings whose actions kind of go beyond want or survival, right? I mean, those things that are actual eldritch beings that create or destroy with seemingly wanton abandon for purposes beyond our comprehension. I think the reason that we haven't had these kinds of stories played out on the big screen is I mean, just for the simple fact that they'd be laden with characters that have absolutely unrelatable qualities. There's nothing that the general audience could use as a tether to connect mentally or emotionally to whatever or whoever the main story is about, right? I don't think that the general populace would be able to connect to Azathoth, right, or Cthulhu, or the Yellow King. Yeah, I think the closest that we might get is, say, It from the Stephen King universe. But we all understand that It is not a clown. It is the personification of chaos and greed and hunger and fear. And he fights a turtle named Maturin. And yeah, these are two like galaxy big space beings, and one of them just happens to send a piece of himself onto Earth every 27 years and turn into a clown. But it, kind of it. I mean, we can understand the aims and goals, right? He needs to eat. I suppose everything needs to eat, so I don't think you could really argue that is a relatable characteristic, right? The need to feed, since everything that's living feeds somehow. But yeah, I think that's about as close as we get is Stephen King's It. I mean, we have had some movies and shows where the monster's goals and aims are kind of shrouded in mystery, but those are kind of few and farther in between than even movies like It. And I mean, even then, most of the time that we do find out what exactly the evil demons or creatures or abhorrent monsters are after in the end, like what they actually want. And usually it's something that, for better or ill, we could understand and relate to and connect with as a human, right? The demons want power. Humans want power all the time, every day, 24/7, 365. People are afraid. Maybe the monsters are afraid, right? Maybe you got a Frankenstein's creature thing going on here. Your Bigfoot, right? You come across Bigfoot and he beats the shit out of everybody, right? He just mollywops all of these campers. Well, why? Well, because you're encroaching on his territory. There's only one of them that we know of, and he's afraid. Fear is a really big human trait that we can dial into. So in all of these movies, we learn a lot more about all of these creatures too, right? We learn their strengths, their weaknesses, their personalities. their wants and desires, right? We get to know all about them. Enough to even invite them over for Christmas dinner and shell out for a string of fan fiction and body pillows with their humanized mugs plastered all over them. But I think that's really where the next great streak of kick-ass stories is going to come from. Just a ton of sci-fi thrillers or horror stories that never get resolved, right? Where the good guys lose and lose horribly, which almost never happens. I want to see the version of Terminator where the killer Terminator robots and Skynet actually do take over the planet, and then we see where they go from there, right? After all, humanity is, well, terminated, right? What does Skynet do then? What happens to all the Terminators? I mean, they killed all the humans. Do they just shut down? Do they go out into space? Do they turn the Earth into a giant planetoid spaceship? Who knows? But that's the movie I want to see. That's the Terminator sequel they need to make. No more of this dark fate bullcrap. Now, come to think of it, I guess that we do have a ton of Warhammer 40k stories where, in the grim dark, there is only war and whatnot. And everything is absolutely horrific in every sense of the word. But, I mean, even with 40k, we know what the Gods of Chaos have going for them, right? We know their aims and goals. We know their weaknesses. We know their beefs with one another. We know who they feud and fight with. Same thing with all of the other factions. I suppose it does have its elements of mystery and wanton destruction and debauchery. Like there's this faction of evil space elf clowns, and they have an evil clown god, and they keep something called the Dark Library. At least I think it's called the Dark Library. Pretty sure it's called the Dark Library. But no one really knows what the evil elf space clowns want, or why they do what they do. But yeah, I mean, realistically, you could also explain away that gap of information by none of the authors of 40k lore really picking up the pen and fleshing out any of those kinds of stories and whatnot. Not giving the Imperium any long-lasting encounters with them and such. And I do feel like this particular essence of storytelling, the fear and the reality of the unknown, and it's crashing down onto us, it's kind of been lost along the way. We really want to know everything. And we want all of the stories to unfold about every little detail, and it really kind of gets out of control here. Take Star Wars, for example. Now, in the original trilogy, the Force was this mysterious, universal, binding, magical energy that, it had really little in the way of explanation behind it. The Force was this pseudo-spiritual, mythical, like luck and karma and the ethereal miasma of the afterlife kind of all rolled into one power that unified everything. But we really didn't understand it or get too much exposition on it, and that was fine. The more of that, the merrier. That's what made the Force cool. And we, along the way, in the Tridge, We found out that certain people could harness the Force, call on it. It has a light side and a dark side. And that's really it. And for a long time, that's how the Force stayed, mysterious and out of reach of the audience's comprehension. And there's that little bit again, that unrelatableness, that part of the grand mythos that we don't get to understand because the author doesn't want us to understand, because it's a part of the story that's meant to not be solved, to not I mean, just like Yoda's race, we don't. George did that on purpose. We're never going to know what Yoda's race is called, and he wants it kept that way. He wants that air of mystery and mythical being to remain in essence in his story. But at the same time, he came in with the prequels and kind of screwed that up with The Phantom Menace when he involved the use of midichlorians, the microscopic life forms responsible for individuals' measured control of the Force. The higher the count, the more control you have. By making it simple and scientific, it really cheapens the Force because it basically breaks it down to a numbers game. Right? Whoever has the highest number wins. Simple as that. There's no more mystery, no more mysticism, just numbers. And that makes for a pretty shitty story if you ask me. I mean, this is just one of the reasons the originals beat the prequels out so damn hard, even though the prequels had a lot more money and CGI and, well, I guess the Tridge had a lot of memorable casting behind it, but it's not the point. It's also one reason, this over-exposition, that the prequels got a bunch of hate in the first place. And it's taken over 20 years to smooth that over with the fans, a lot of whom still aren't very well placated. I have a bunch of pals who still absolutely hate the prequels. But that kind of just goes to show how details like that really matter to a story. And if you screw with them, it messes up the story and it makes your audience really upset with what you're doing. So, how about we don't screw with the mysticism and mystery in our stories, right? Let's keep that essence of unrelatable, unknown, uncomprehendable, uncomprehensive, whatever the word is. Let's keep some questions unanswered and be strategic about what exactly gets told and what doesn't, so we know where our audience's heads are at, what they're wondering about, what they want to know. Not so we can give them the answers, but so we can give them more stories that deal with those same kind of questions. And it's that lure, it's that reel, and it's gonna keep pulling them in. Keep them reading, keep them watching, get them more and more invested in the stories and the characters. If you know everything about somebody and they're not mysterious at all, they lose a lot of their interest. I mean, look at the Lovecraftian myths and stories. Stuff we got from the good old H.P. himself. He didn't give us a lot of answers. And that, in oh so few words, is a primary reason why his stories lived on and thrived. They even spawned a ton of other similar stories from a ton of other writers that carried on his work. It's the mystery of it all, the unknown, the so screwed up that we can't comprehend factor of it all. So yeah, let's get more of that, please. I know it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of Lovecraft and, things like the SCP Foundation stories, and yeah, my bias is pretty on the nose here. But am I wrong? Do the audiences just want to be spoon-fed their stories? Do they just want paint by number shit? I mean, there's a good populace of people that do, but those aren't the ones that you're gonna want to capitalize on. You're going to want the super fans, right? You're gonna want the nerds. You're gonna want the convention goers, the cosplayers. You're going to want the people that are heavily invested in this shit. So, okay. Really focusing on the economics of it all. Interest in comic book projects have taken a huge downturn lately. Unless it's The Boys or Invincible. Marvel's really shit in the bed at the moment. Things are not going very well. What is getting the most attention? The original works. And most of the original works being done by the big streaming companies. Not Disney Plus, mind you, the other ones. And they're using books or comic books or graphic novels, right? Walking Dead, it's like 3 or 4 spinoffs. Peacemaker, God, I love Peacemaker. It's one of the few things that DC live action has done just so great. Reacher, Amazon Prime, I mean, it's hitting it out of the park. I'd say a good 7 out of 10 times, as opposed to Netflix's 8.5. It's not far behind, dude. So maybe we do have a society built on cannibalism. Maybe we do have a city of psychotic killers. Maybe we throw in a bit of our unrelatable traits here and there. Maybe there is a town where a bunch of businesses do things like skin people alive and sell their skin like raccoons to, dress them up and wear them like Sunday hats. Yeah, I'd pay to see that, sure. It'd be the most gruesome thing ever, and I'd be totally grossed out the entire time. But you know what? That's the added bit of writing that makes it compelling. Don't explain what you don't have to. That's it. That's all we want. Good storytelling. And I have a gut feeling that stories that have those unrelatable traits and that essence of the unknown and mystery, that's the way to go. But that is all I have time for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning back in. Stick around for more Sci-Fi Unchained. But for now, live long and prosper, my friends, and may the Force be with us all.